After the events of Avengers Endgame, Peter Parker aka Spider-Man, played by Tom Holland, goes on a school field trip around the world with his friends, and on this field trip they encounter many strange things, including Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. Just in case you haven't read the title of this video yet, this is a spoiler-filled review of Spider-Man Far From Home, which means I'm going to be talking about spoilers pretty much throughout the video, so if you haven't seen Spider-Man Far From Home yet, then please do not watch this video, otherwise proceed at your own risk. Enjoy. Spider-Man Far From Home is a movie that I think was under a lot of pressure to succeed due to the fact that it's coming off the back of Avengers Endgame, which has gained huge critical praise and has gone on to become the second highest grossing movie of all time, as well as the fact that Spider-Man Far From Home is the conclusion to the Infinity Saga and not Endgame as was once thought. I will admit that even if I doubt there will be a Marvel movie that gives me the same experience that Avengers Endgame gave me, I was still really pumped for Spider-Man Far From Home because, as some of you may know, I'm a huge fan of Spider-Man. He's actually my favorite superhero of all time, so anything involving Spider-Man automatically gets me excited. Although this one was particularly intriguing because it's basically the sequel to Avengers Endgame as much as it is a sequel to Spider-Man Homecoming, and I was interested to see how much of this movie was an Endgame epilogue, and how much of it would be a Spider-Man story. So let's start with the pros. Tom Holland's performance as Peter Parker is still my favourite version of the character, and he shows exactly why he is my favourite in this movie. I've always loved that childlike innocence and naivety that he brings to the role because that makes him more relatable as a character. At his core, Peter is a kid who is dealing with everyday things such as school, friendships, and working up the courage to tell the girl he likes how he feels about her. In Far From Home, you get to watch Peter take steps towards becoming Spider-Man. Spider-Man Homecoming was a very small-scale movie. A lot of the stuff Spidey did in that movie was actually street level, which is something I really enjoyed in that movie. In Far From Home, on the other hand, Spidey has to take a lot of steps in order to fill the shoes that Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, left behind after his death in Avengers Endgame. So Spider-Man has a lot to do here, and as a result, this movie is on a much larger scale than Homecoming was, and it's not just because he's pretty much traveling the world in this one. You also get a lot of moments that tug at the heartstrings a little, particularly in the beginning of the movie. There's a scene where Spider-Man is helping his aunt with an event at a homeless shelter for people who are affected by Thanos' snap. And during this event, Spidey is overwhelmed by reporters asking him if he's now the head of the Avengers, and whether or not there's a plan if aliens come and attack again. That was one of the many scenes where you could feel the weight and pressure that is now being thrust on Peter's shoulders, and he's not entirely sure how to handle that. He doesn't feel like he can live up to the legacy that Tony Stark left behind, and there are many points throughout the movie where he's wondering if Stark even made the right choice taking him on. This movie captures the need to fill in the shoes of someone else and how that pressure can affect a person's self-esteem and even the choices they make really, really well. A great example of this is when Peter gives Quentin Beck Tony's glasses even though Tony passes those on to Peter specifically, because Peter doesn't see what Tony Stark saw in him when he took Peter on, and doesn't see himself as the next Iron Man. You could even say that Peter feels as though he has failed Tony Stark because he doesn't really know what to do. Peter very rarely has a chance to breathe in this movie. He has a lot of shit to do in this one. To start with, he's trying to impress MJ, the girl he likes, before this other kid who also likes MJ can do the same, and be there for his pals on this trip. He just wants to have a relaxing time. At the same time, Nick Fury is coming to him and he's like, "You're a very difficult person to contact, Spider-Man." And he needs Spidey's help to defend the world from this new threat, that being the Elementals, or so he thinks. So Spider-Man has to balance that with having a relaxing trip with his friends, which is a classic Spider-Man trope. Never having enough time for your life priorities while also trying to be a superhero when you're not actually ready to be. Which is something that this movie captures spectacularly. Ha! See what I did there? Ha? No? No? Okay, moving on. Spider-Man Far From Home is a very well-paced movie because Peter is always doing something, and as a result the narrative feels smoother and even flows better than it did in Homecoming, even though I do really like that movie. There was never a point in this movie where I was like, well, this is boring. Ugh, this isn't interesting. Cut to the next scene, please. One minute he's having a moment alone with MJ, and the next minute he's being called by Nick Fury to deal with this new threat, which initially appears to be the Elementals, which is then revealed to be Mysterio, who is creating this crazy, elaborate scheme to make himself look good by making Spider-Man look bad, so Mysterio can look like the hero. I'll be honest, Mysterio is one of my favorite Spider-Man villains of all time, and admittedly I was strangely intrigued when the trailer started portraying him as a hero, which, even if the filmmakers had actually done that, it could have been really cool because some of my favorite characters, for example, start off as bad guys and then go on to become good guys. That said, I was really relieved when Mysterio revealed himself to be a villain. Jake Gyllenhaal is amazing as this character. He relished every scene he was in with this insanely charismatic performance. One minute he seems like a really cool and trustworthy dude to Peter, and the next he's an asshole. And I thought Gyllenhaal balanced those two aspects of the character wonderfully. There are sequences where Mysterio creates these illusions that Peter has to fight his way out of that are just mesmerizing with some incredible CGI work and metaphorical imagery, such as the zombified corpse of Iron Man coming out of the grave to attack Spidey, which to me was very symbolic of Peter feeling as though he has failed Tony Stark, as well as being a very cool reference to the Marvel Zombies comic, which by the way is amazing. And that leads me to what I love about Mysterio as a villain. He got inside Peter's head, he preyed on his insecurities and fears, and just completely messes with him so much that he even begins to question what is real and what isn't. The Mysterio sequences were basically everything I wanted from those sequences. Jake Gyllenhaal's actually been trying to get into these movies for a while now. Some of you may not know this, but he almost replaced Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man after Maguire had a back injury and almost didn't return for Spider-Man 2, so it's pretty cool to finally see him in a Spider-Man movie. I do think that the exposition scene where Mysterio reveals himself to be a villain was a bit much though. I can't see why they needed that scene because loads of people in the cinema, including me, were just sat there like, what the heck? I just felt that it went on for a little too long, and I did think that there was some information revealed in that scene that I don't think was that necessary. For example, it's revealed that one of the guys working for Mysterio is actually the scientist that Jeff Bridges was shouting at in Iron Man 1 because he wasn't able to do what Tony Stark was able to do in a cave. Yes, I did think that was a cool connection to that movie, and my mouth did admittedly drop, but at the same time, that doesn't really add anything to the movie. Although I do think that Mysterio being this guy who used to work for Tony Stark and never really got any credit or recognition from him was pretty clever, and Jake Gyllenhaal's performance and line delivery in this scene saved it from feeling like it was dragging. I really liked Zendaya as MJ a lot more than I liked her in Homecoming, because in that movie she didn't really have a character beyond just being a sarcastic, moody teen. But in Far From Home she felt like a more well-rounded and realized character. Zendaya still retained that sarcastic and dark sense of humor from the first movie, but she also added an awkwardness to the character that I thought was really sweet. I thought the scenes between her and Peter were really cute, and the movie does a fantastic job at extending that relationship and exploring it more. MJ actually figures out that Peter is Spider-Man in this movie, and that opens up this really cool dynamic between the two characters. This is still a teen romance movie disguised as a superhero movie, however Far From Home does take a few more steps towards becoming an Avengers movie because Peter has to really step up and dig deep within himself and go up against a lot more things in this movie. I thought they did a better job balancing the high school stuff with the superhero stuff this time around because they add a race against time element to the high school stuff. Peter really wants to confess how he feels to MJ, but every chance he gets, there's always something in the way, which makes the high school scenes more interesting as a result. So during those scenes, you never wish for Peter to start shooting webs at things because there's always something happening. I was never bored when watching Spider-Man Far From Home. It definitely felt like Jon Watts, the director of this movie, and Homecoming was more confident with the action scenes in this movie than he was with Homecoming, which is understandable because before Homecoming, he hadn't actually made anything like that before, so to me it seems that he's taken what he learned from Homecoming and applied it to this movie and improved upon it, and as a result we get some really well-directed action scenes. The Mysterio sequences, for one, are incredible, and the final battle is a much more intense and brutal set piece than the final battle in Homecoming. There's just so much going on. Peter's trying to evade these drones which are spraying him with bullets. At one point his web shooters are disabled. Happy's trying to keep Peter's friends safe from the same drones. It's just a blast. There's even a moment where Spider-Man is using a sign as a shield and something else as a hammer, and it was such a cool shot because it was symbolic of Spider-Man finally filling the shoes of the Avengers. The shield, of course, being symbolic of Captain America, the hammer being symbolic of Thor, and his suit being symbolic of Iron Man, seeing as how he made the suit using Stark Tech, and that he has finally embodied Iron Man and filled the shoes he's been struggling to fill for the whole movie. He pretty much embodies the Avengers in that moment, and it was such an uplifting moment and an amazing use of symbolism. The comedy is an aspect of this movie that works surprisingly well considering where they've implemented it. There's a lot of comedy in the scenes that deal with the aftermath of everyone coming back when the Hulk used the Infinity Stones to bring everyone back. There was a surprising amount of comedy in those scenes, and I was worried that the comedy would decrease the impact of that event, but it didn't. If anything, it was an interesting and hilarious way of seeing the funny side of being wiped from existence and then returning 5 years later. It wasn't just, ha ha ha, I died 5 years ago and now I'm back. Ain't that funny? Ha! There are moments where characters will complain that their younger siblings are now older than them as a result of them disappearing in the snap. Flash Thompson at one point even tries to get some alcohol because he thinks that even though he was dead for 5 years, he's now somehow old enough to legally drink alcohol. With that said, the comedy is often used to mask things that don't really make sense. There's a scene where Spider-Man is bounced back and forth on a train to this location, which felt really quick and rushed, and they tried to mask the fact that it made basically no sense with comedy. The comedy is really good, so you could just laugh and roll with it, but once you start to notice what they're masking with the comedy, it's pretty hard to unsee it. There is a scene that had me and my friend just completely mouth drop. I am of course talking about the mid-credits scene. You find out that Mysterio's plan worked, and now the public know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and they think that he had something to do with the attack that happened at the end of the movie. All of this is delivered by J.K. freaking Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. I gotta tell you, my jaw hit rock bottom, and me and my friend were just sat there with our mouths just wide open with amazement. It was... oh my days, it was amazing. I never thought that we would ever see J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson after the original Spider-Man trilogy. I just never thought that would ever happen. And I am so glad they did not recast him, because that is one of the few movie roles that I think you just cannot recast. He was perfect in that role, and the fact that they got him again makes me so unbelievably happy and excited to see where he pops up next. I will admit, I am excited that we're getting closer and closer to that classic Spider-Man story where he's on the run. He's been framed for something he didn't do, and now the whole city hates him. But I am wondering how they're going to do that now, because now literally everyone knows who he is. However, that does make sense, because as technology like satellite imagery and CCTV becomes more advanced, it's becoming more and more unbelievable that superheroes like Spider-Man can keep their identities a secret for as long as they do. We're in an era now where people could literally just zoom in on Spider-Man with their smartphones while he's sitting on a rooftop taking his mask off, so in a way I'm glad that they've done that, because if they had continued to have it so that nobody knew who Spider-Man was under the mask, then it would have gotten to the point where it just wouldn't have made sense. The second end credits scene was funny, but not entirely necessary. It's revealed that Nick Fury was a Skrull. More specifically, Talos from Captain Marvel, which I thought was pretty cool because I like that character a lot, and it was nice to see that he's still around. We also find out that the real Nick Fury is in space with the rest of the Skrulls watching over things, and yeah, it was pretty funny, and it is pretty cool because he could be up there because he's setting up S.W.O.R.D., which is the space version of S.H.I.E.L.D., but essentially all the scene was just a scene that revealed that Nick Fury was a Skrull the whole time, and that the real Nick Fury is actually chilling in space. And when you look at it like that, it doesn't seem that necessary, because aside from really subtly hinting that Nick Fury could be setting up S.W.O.R.D., it doesn't really seem that necessary in the grand scheme of things in terms of the plot of this movie. Overall, I had a really good time with Spider-Man Far From Home. I actually like it more than I did Homecoming, which is really saying something because I really love Spider-Man Homecoming. But Far From Home was just a fraction better. To put it simply, I was marveled. Told you I wasn't gonna stop. I'm really excited for the future of Spider-Man after this movie, as well as the MCU as a whole. Seriously, this is the end of the Infinity Saga. The end of an era of Marvel movies, and the end of an era of movies as a whole. I gotta tell you, the Infinity Saga might just be the most epic saga ever created, and I cannot wait to see what else Marvel has planned. Spider-Man Far From Home was a great time, and I'm gonna give it a 9.4 out of 10. So those are my thoughts on Spider-Man Far From Home. I do hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter if you want to, not forcing you. But before I go, I would just like to ask you guys, what did you think of Spider-Man Far From Home? Did you think it was good? Did you think it was bad? Did you think it was somewhere in the middle? Please leave your thoughts down in the comments below, and I will indeed see you guys in the next one. Until then, take care.